Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever it is that you are, wherever you may be. Thank you very much for making us a part of your day. I am Brad Franklin, a creative content writer here in Chesterfield, and I'm very glad to tell you that Chesterfield Behind the Mic is on the air once again. Even though it's the summertime and certainly there's a lot going on and, the temperatures are up and everybody's out doing stuff, the fall is not that far away. And for a lot of folks this summer, certainly there is an opportunity for you to think about what's ahead of you, right? And for a lot of folks, maybe there's a question of childcare. Maybe there's a question even now of childcare. And what we want to do today is to have some folks on to talk about maybe meeting that need. And we're going to start today with Janice Stovall, who is with Social Services. Janice, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Like I said, childcare is a question, I think, for a lot of people, especially, as we get closer to the fall, but certainly year round, right? People have jobs, they have jobs that change, they have needs that change. And I'm just curious as we get started we wanted to have you and Caitlyn on today to talk about sort of some of the resources that folks can reach out for, and as well as some of the information they might need. Before we get into it, let me take a step back and sort of talk to you first about your background. How is it that you came to be here today? Which is always a very awkward question, but it's a good place to start. What's your background with childcare and with social services?
Yeah, so I've been with social services for the last 27 years.
Oh, wow.
Yes, for a year and a half, I worked part-time until I came full-time in 96.
Okay.
And the last 8 years, I have been working at the child care program.
Okay.
So yes, I've been around a lot. I've done a lot of programs.
Yeah.
And childcare is the main focus right now.
Was that something growing up that you thought you wanted to do? Was it something that you kind of stumbled into? How did you get into this line of work?
Well, I always have the need and the want to help people and to help families. And because of my family background, that was an area that I really wanted to be a part of. And I felt like that was a good way for me to serve families and to give them what I didn't have. Right. And that's information and that's help. That's a listening ear and a helping hand in a time of need.
For folks who are obviously in a situation where they need that helping hand, who need, that have that need, I would imagine that folks like you who are, on those front lines, who have the information that they need, the opportunities to sort of share that information are really paramount. In terms of what you do and in terms of the childcare piece of it, what are some of the things that you hear the most from people? What are some of the needs that you hear the most from folks?
Some of the needs is that they want their child to be in a safe environment. We also have a need of folks who have children who have disabilities or special needs. Right. That is an area that is widely needed. At this point, I do have a child who has cerebral palsy, so I do know how difficult it is to have childcare and quality childcare for a child who does have special needs. Right.
And in terms of the conversation we're going to have today, I want to start with sort of, the questions that folks might have, right? People, like yourself, folks who, whether it's folks with special needs or people who are just looking for childcare, maybe even in a pinch, a lot of things change, jobs change, that kind of stuff. And I'm just curious as we sort of talk through this, what are some of the things that folks should look for when they're trying to figure out what childcare options are out there and what are the best options for them? What are some of the questions that you think they should really kind of focus on?
Yeah. So we encourage families to look for quality care. And quality care looks like an environment where your child is growing, where they're learning, they're getting social skills and safety, most of all. Right. And we encourage families to look at what your needs are as a family and then try to find a quality vendor around what your needs are. For example, you may have a school-age child and you need that child to have transportation to and from school. So the important question is, do you service my child's school? Things like that. How can I get updates on my child and are they going to be safe? Right. So that is, what we stress to parents and encourage them to look for quality.
Right. And in terms of along those same lines, I want to reference a website, childcareva.com, which I know is a big focus for you guys. And certainly as I was doing some research for this podcast was certainly a huge resource for me and for folks out there who have questions about, what kinds of things they should be looking for for their child, it's a great resource. I want to specifically call up, and you're probably seeing it on screen right now. It's essentially a sheet that has, for those who might be listening to the podcast, essentially on one side it's questions that you might have for yourself as you are looking at a different provider, and then on the other side, things you might want to consider both during and after maybe you visit a provider. So, for example, is the facility licensed? What are the qualifications and the training requirements of the staff? What are the health and safety practices? And I know you're familiar with these questions and that list. As you look through this stuff, what kind of really stands out to you the most in these situations? Is it really kind of a group of questions? Is it that you're able to answer them all? What's the sort of thing that stands out the most to you?
The thing that stands out to me, and it's very important to also make sure you have that meeting with that vendor.
Right.
I know with COVID, they may not be able to do a tour,
right,
but having those meetings and, like I said, the specific needs to what your family needs. And license is a good, question to ask. And on that website that you mentioned, they do have a parent list where if they search for a provider, it lists all their information. It lists their inspection reports, because that's important. You want to know, what are some of the reports in safety and health concerns for the vendor. So that is very important. And that information is available to parents on the website,
right,
amongst a ton of resources,
right, yeah,
that are available, not just for citizens in the Chesterfield area, but it gives you a list of all of the Virginia vendors.
Right.
So that is a great resource.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the things that in talking with you for this podcast, it certainly seems like there's an opportunity for folks, if they want that information, to either find it on that website or to contact folks like you, folks who are in the trenches, so to speak, of this, who understand the way licensure works, who understands what these vendors and different places need to provide. I would also imagine that there are a lot of folks in this day and age who probably provide childcare services who are not licensed, who are not necessarily on the list that you're referencing. I'm just curious, what would be your message to folks if they're considering one of those options? What would your message to them be?
Well, my message would be there is a provider section, and it has the information from A to Z of what you need to do to become a provider. Okay. It has all the forms. It has the background information. It also gives infomercials that's available and training that's available. It also gives the link to Child Care Aware, and they can connect you to a specialist who can walk you through how to become licensed.
Right.
So it's not a road that you walk alone, but there is a group of people that are supporting providers and parents to meet the needs of the community.
I would imagine, too, that as we've gone through the last few years, it certainly seems like, there are a lot of folks who maybe were in traditional sort of 9-to-5 gigs who are now kind of taking a step back and looking at all of the different options that are out there. And I can imagine there are a lot of folks that you probably talk to on a regular basis or hear about on a regular basis who are considering having, an in-home facility, or considering, having a childcare that they run themselves. What are some of the things that you would point to for them specifically? What are some of the considerations that they should have as they sort of contemplate making that sort of change?
They would consider their hours.
Okay.
And as you stated, there are unconventional hours that people work, and night care may be needed. And that is available. If your child needs special care, the family day homes is a great environment. So making that wise choice, and I can't stress that enough about making the wise choice to do that as a vendor and as a parent. As a vendor, being a subsidy provider also has additional options with that, and all of that is available on the website. And I can't say enough about that website because it is it is a great,
it's like a gold mine.
It is. Yeah. It's something that you pull up every day because there is something new. There's always updates that are available.
Right. And it's great to have all of it in one place,
yes.
For folks who have a lot of questions. And I can imagine if you have such a wide spectrum of questions, you have all of them in the right place. It's easier. Last one for you. Obviously, there are a lot of folks out there who probably have childcare needs who maybe the cost is just, is the prohibitive issue, right? It is, there are lots of providers, there's lots of options, but the cost is an issue. For folks who might be having, issues with that, where cost is the biggest thing, what kind of opportunities or kind of programs are there offered, and what can folks do to sort of take advantage of some of those to see if they're eligible?
Yes, so the Child Care Subsidy Program, it is a program to support that, and it can cover all or a portion of the cost of care. There are financial and non-financial requirements.
Right.
The application process is available online. They also have the flyer where the income limits are. Right now, they're in an expanded eligibility period.
Okay.
So for a period of time, and if you meet certain criteria, there's a higher 85% of the medium income limit that is a guideline. So it's a good change that has happened, that more families are eligible for the service. So if they are in need of care, you can submit an application and talk to a child care worker, and then they will thoroughly go through the application process with you and determine if their family is eligible for assistance.
Awesome. Well, Janice, thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I'm joined now by Caitlyn Plaskett, who is also with Social Services. Caitlyn, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you coming on. Like I was talking about Janice, obviously this is a time, going into fall where there's lots of questions for folks who are looking for childcare. For your end of it, though, it's much more about folks who maybe more consistent along the spectrum of the year, because we're talking about are people who are maybe looking for employment. And I'm just curious, before we get into that, talk to me about your background. How did you get involved in this? Did you grow up wanting to work for social services? What's your background and how'd you get into it?
Kind of. So I actually started out in adoptions and foster care.
Okay.
So I was with the agency for, I guess it's almost been 8 years now.
Okay.
And in the last year of transition to employment services. So it's still in the scope of serving families, which was really important to me. But now it allows me to do it in a way that's a little bit more focused and finite on what I can help them work through.
Right.
So that's kind of what ended me up here.
Cool. Now, in terms of what you do, there's an acronym, right? The FEP, Full Employment Program.
Yes.
That's a big part of your job. Talk to me about what the Full Employment Program is.
It's actually really neat. It's new for us, but what it does is it allows us to work with providers who might need staff.
Okay.
Maybe their barrier is that they can't afford to pay those staff. So if they hire people that are working with my program, which is the VIEW program, which I can explain a little bit more about later.
Right.
But if they're hiring those people, then we can offer a stipend and help them to offset costs for having that person employed.
Mm-hmm.
It is time limited, so it'd be like a 6-month thing, and there's 3 different tiers to it based on how many hours the individual's working.
Right.
But it's a great resource. Doesn't necessarily have to go to salary. It could go to training. It can go to whatever that agency's needs might be. But it's really a creative way to help kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You get people employed, and you're helping employers to make it happen.
Right. So in this scenario, what you're working with is you've got providers who maybe have opportunities for folks who can come in and work at those facilities or work with those vendors. And so what this program does is it gives them the incentive essentially to bring those folks in. Is that a good way to kind of describe
Absolutely, yes.
And so then in terms of what you do on a day-to-day basis, are you mostly working with folks who are looking for those vendors and those opportunities, or are you mostly working with the vendors and the providers to find those folks?
A little bit of both. So we really can kind of serve wherever the need is. We have people who are dedicated to working with, more so the consumers, and then some who are dedicated more to working with the providers.
Right.
But there's a ton of overlap. I would say even outside of just the people who are in that program, we've got people who just say you decided that you wanted some help with employment.
Okay.
You could reach out to us and we'd help you in whatever that could mean.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of different ways that we can serve anybody related to education and employment.
Cool. Now you mentioned the VIEW program. Talk to me a little bit about what that is and how that sort of works.
Yeah, so the VIEW program, it's really neat. So anybody who is receiving TANF, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, they will be automatically enrolled in our VIEW program, which is Virginia's Initiative for Employment and Work. And what that means is we help them to achieve any educational or employment goals. They work with us for approximately 2 years, but it's really a great opportunity to help them become resourceful and get to a situation where when they're not receiving benefits, they're able to provide for themselves and their families.
Right. And in terms of, we mentioned when I was talking to Janice earlier, childcareva.com, there's also a lot of good information there for folks who are, whether that's folks who are looking for work or for maybe even providers who have questions about sort of the latest information and stuff that they need to know. I'm just curious from your standpoint, what are the biggest questions that you get or some of the biggest hurdles that you have to sort of work through as you try to connect these different pieces of the puzzle?
So you're looking at, obviously you want to provide a provider with someone who already has the skills.
Right.
And so sometimes you're trying to figure out, are there trainings available that we could offer and get people trained so that they can naturally fall into these positions? You're looking at people with different barriers. There may be different challenges in their life that might make it difficult for them to get into some of these jobs. And so how can we work through that? How can we get creative? Finances are always a challenge.
Right.
Fortunately, we're able to help in a lot of different ways there.
Right.
So we just really try to be creative about it. Everybody's situation is so unique.
Right.
So there's not like a one-stop-all solution for everything.
Right.
And that's why it's really important that my team is so creative and really, kind of works with each individual to figure out what's going to be the best fit for them.
You mentioned barriers a few minutes ago. I'm just curious, what are some of the things you hear from folks who have, those barriers that are kind of standing in between them and where they want to be?
I mean, housing is a
Right.
huge barrier. I think everybody can relate to that right now, given the state of the world.
Yeah.
You have old bills. You've got people who might have been in a career for several years, and because the world has shifted, that might not be available to them anymore.
Right.
Childcare, obviously, huge barrier.
Right.
There's a lot of different situations, but I think a lot of them come down to financial situations, and
Right.
there's ways that we can help.
Right. Now, in terms of, you mentioned the world sort of shifting. I was curious as we were kind of getting into this and sort of learning more about what you do and the way that you sort of connect these pieces. I was wondering, when Janice and I talked with, jobs and change and everything, maybe folks have needs for childcare. And I'm curious if you have seen an influx of folks who are interested in this field, who maybe they were in another type of job, but this opportunity seems like one that fits them better. And I can imagine there might be folks who are watching, listening to this podcast right now who think like, I've been kind of thinking about this. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious if you've been getting a lot of that because of that sort of shift in the world and sort of the way that we all think differently about work and employment.
I think you're seeing a lot of people look at different opportunities that they may not have considered before.
Right.
When you've got people who have been under or unemployed for a couple of years now, you're starting to think, well, I've got 2 kids. I guess I could watch so-and-so's kids. Well, should I do a childcare?
Right.
And that's where we want people to be. Think about what your situation is. Think about what you're naturally doing.
Right.
And how can we help you do that in a way that's going to help you meet your family's needs and hopefully bring you, a good income as well.
Right. Now, in terms of the number of providers that you work with, has that number changed dramatically, substantially? Not really that much. What's the change been like in that sort of market, so to speak, in these last couple of years?
So we really hadn't targeted the child care facilities until recently.
Okay.
I think we just, as a county, started to recognize this is a need that hits in a whole bunch of different areas. And so it's smart to look at this and think, how can we holistically approach this?
Right.
So I would say we're being a lot more targeted now with working with the child cares, whereas previously it was just kind of if one approached us.
Right.
So we're taking a lot more of a proactive approach now, which I think is definitely going to be beneficial.
Yeah. So let's say if somebody who's watching or listening is curious about this, wants to take that next step. Would you say, hey, start on childcareva.com? Would you tell them to reach out to you directly? What would be sort of your recommendation for what their first steps into that larger world would be?
I would start with the child care website, and then I would definitely recommend reaching out to us, especially if they are already, receiving benefits or working with social services. If you're working with us already, let's get connected. We can help you out and kind of steer the ship and get you in the right place.
Right. Now, in terms of kind of answering these questions for themselves, folks who have, questions maybe they have that they think they even have answers to. What are some of the pitfalls for folks who are kind of along this sort of spectrum who are thinking about these things? What are some of the things you would almost advise them to stay away from?
Doing it too much on your own. I mean, use your resources.
Right.
Reach out. We're here. We're available. We don't have the answers to everything, but we can definitely help you find them in a way that you might not have been able to navigate on your own, because we've got some contacts in the field and we've helped some people through this. And so there may be some opportunities here where we can help you avoid something that isn't going to work out for you.
Right. And in terms of what you do and the people that you work with, and sort of the provider network that you've seen. Have you seen a really good response now that you mentioned, going into the facility, child care facilities, and sort of reaching out to them more? Is that something that you think is continuing to kick up and certainly you'll sort of see more of as you guys go forward?
I'm definitely hoping for that. It is, like I said, very new to us. So in the past couple of months is where we've really started that. But I'm hoping that once we have more of these success stories, we can really share that with people and help them see there's light at the end of the tunnel. Don't be discouraged, because we're one community.
Right.
So the needs affect all of us. And so I think if we're able to really demonstrate that, that's going to build a lot more trust and help them.
Yeah. All right. Last one for you. I asked Janice a similar question about unlicensed providers, and I'm just curious to get your point of view from the other side of the coin, so to speak, on what do you do when you have somebody who is unlicensed? Is that a hard and fast look? You got to do this first. How does that process work for them? And is that definitely something they have to change in order to sort of get to that other side?
I think it's really to each their own.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think that's going to make somebody not able to be a provider or anything like that. I think that there may be more opportunities should they become licensed. And so we would want to help them if that is their goal, but it wouldn't create a situation where my team wouldn't be able to help. We'd still be able to assist if they chose not to go that route.
Good deal. Well, Caitlyn, thank you very much for joining the podcast today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's get you out of here. Make sure you check us out online on social media. On Twitter, it's at Chesterfield VA, and on Instagram, it's Chesterfield Virginia, all one word. And on Facebook, check out our podcast page. Just search Chesterfield Behind the Mic. Make sure to like that page so you can keep up with us as we go forward. Now, let me tell you about all the ways you can watch us. You can check us out on our YouTube channel and on our website at chesterfield.gov/podcast. An audio-only version of the show is available there, as well as on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Overcast, and a whole host of other services. You can also watch the podcast on WCCT Thursday through Sunday at 7, on the weekends at noon. That's Comcast Channel 98 and Verizon Channel 28. And lastly, you can check out chesterfield.gov/connect with us for an opportunity for you to give us information and get information from us. My thanks to my director, Martin Stith, and all the good people here in communications and media for making this possible. And my thanks to you for joining us today. So, from all of us here in Chesterfield, thank you very much for making us a part of your day. We'll see you again real soon. Take good care.